very senior manager. He was telling me about the challenges of managing very skilled portfolio managers who are still falling prey to behavioral biases.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of The Blunt Dollar. Today's guest, Elsa Razborsek, started her finance career at Goldman Sachs as a sell-side equity analyst. Then after an MBA and a stint in corporate finance at Shell, she pivoted again, this time to coaching, from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, across Europe, the US, and Asia.
The more I read, the more I realized that there were so many parallels between how we behave in investing and how we behave in our romantic relationships. And oftentimes how we do one thing is how we do everything.
What would you advise to someone who's trying to figure out when the path isn't linear?
You need to be mindful of geography. And there are markets where career pivots and nonlinear backgrounds are way more accepted and valued. You need to become really intentional about
This is The Blunt Dollar with Ignacio Ramirez. Quick disclaimer, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and do not constitute financial investment or legal advice. This content is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a substitute for professional advice. Always do your own research and consult a qualified advisor before making any financial decisions. All investments involve risk, including the potential loss of capital. And now, let's get started with the episode. Welcome everyone to a new episode of The Blunt Dollar. Today's guest brings a unique blend of Wall Street grit, coaching insight, and emotional intelligence to the table. Elsa Razborsek started her finance career at Goldman Sachs as a sell-side equity analyst. Then after an MBA and a stint in corporate finance at Shell, she pivoted again, this time to coaching. And not just anyone, Elsa has coached high-achieving professionals from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, across Europe, the US, and Asia. Now she's returning to the world of finance with fresh energy and perspective, one shaped by spreadsheets, sleepless nights, capital markets, career pivots, equity reports, and real life. In this episode, we'll get into what it's really like to navigate finance as a woman, both from the inside and the coach's chair, how stress and wellness show up for finance pros and how to manage both better, and the psychological traps we all fall into, whether we're managing portfolios or personal relationships. Elsa's voice is smart, grounded, and refreshingly human. So this isn't just about markets, it's about mindset, resilience, and what it means to lead with both intellect and empathy. Elsa, I'm super excited to have you on the show. Welcome to The Blunt Dollar.
Thank you so much for that raving introduction. And I'm excited for this conversation too.
So let's get started. Tell us a little bit about you. What is it that you're doing today?
Sure. Well, today I'm chatting with you. Then I have a couple more calls, and then obviously the school runs and all that jazz. But perhaps if you want me to start a little bit with my background, you already gave quite a nice intro there. But perhaps for a bit of context, I'm originally from Portugal, born and raised in Lisbon. And unlike perhaps yourself, and certainly my husband, who always knew he wanted to work in finance, actually, I had other plans when I was a kid. I had these lofty goals that I would help make humanity healthier. And I wanted to be a scientist and make some meaningful contribution in the medical field. So my undergrad degree and my master's degree originally were in biological engineering.
Okay.
And it was only during my master's in biological engineering that I became acquainted with the finance world. We had this subject called Fundamentals of Management. And that's when I heard for the first time about the time value of money and IRR and PVs, things like that, because we're being taught about how to evaluate engineering projects. And if you want to build a factory, is this a good business or is it not? And that's when I really became fascinated by investing. And then ended up at Goldman Sachs when the firm came to do one of those campus recruiting events to recruit summer interns. And long story short, after interviews in Madrid and London, I landed a role as a summer intern in the Global Investment Research Division in London in 2007. So right when we started seeing headlines about the subprime mortgage crisis in the US.
Mhm.
And then on the back of that, I was offered a full-time role once I finished my degree. So I started as a sell-side equity research analyst in January 2008. So I saw
Wow,
all the global
what a
financial
timing.
crisis unravel. Yes, it was a good induction. Did that for a few years in the city, then decided to take a break from the city of London, enrolled in a full-time MBA program in the Netherlands, met my husband in business school, ended up staying here. So I'm calling in from The Hague today.
Wow, what a story. Oh my God. Yeah, like there's a lot of engineering students that definitely move or pivot to the finance industry because of yeah, the great technical skills that you have, and that's obviously very sought after by the big investment banks. And now, basically, so from the conversations I've had with you, I understand that you want to go back to the industry to something similar to what you were doing at the beginning, like equity research. What is drawing you back to the industry after a few years from the on the sidelines?
Sure. So I never really lost touch with the industry. First of all, my husband is a banker, so finance conversations are part of, the dinner table sort of chats. I also have my closest friends who still work in the industry, and unsurprisingly, I've coached many finance professionals over the years in my coaching practice. But the reason I stepped off corporate was in great part because I became a mother and I wanted more flexibility and freedom to be present with my young family. And that's when I also decided to put my corporate career on pause and launch my coaching practice. Now that my kids are a bit older, more independent, I feel like it's time for mommy to have a bit of a renaissance. And I'm really going full circle because I
Hmm.
never lost my fascination for business and investing. And now I'm just going back to that and bringing back that element of my interest to the forefront. And I'm, like you mentioned, like I would be open to going back to equity research, but perhaps even more being on the buy side rather than the sell side.
Hmm.
Um, I always found also private banking very fascinating, private wealth management. And I'm effectively looking more into finding a role where I can bring my knowledge of finance, but also the skills that I developed as a coach that have more to do with client relationship management and people skills. So even investor relations is another field that always fascinated me. But in a way, it feels like really going back to something that I just put a little bit on the back burner, but I never completely abandoned.
So probably by the time people are listening to this, you already have one of those jobs
Fingers
in one
crossed.
of those fields. um, but yeah, talking about coaching, I have a question because the finance industry, particularly the IB world, often glorifies like nonstop hardcore performance, while coaching, I have the feeling it's a completely different world that emphasizes more like presence and reflection. How how did switching between these two worlds shift your perspective on what high performance in the finance industry actually looks like?
I think perhaps what really changed was my understanding what high performance really is, as opposed to peak performance. And I think the key here is sustainability. So when you're thinking about IB or even sell side research, which is part of the IB funnel at the end of the day, it's very fast paced. It's about making decisions quickly, getting results, moving fast, getting promotions quite fast, climbing the ladder. It's all very much about hitting quick milestones. But often, like when you have a peak, you can have a crash after that. And it's not necessarily sustainable. For me, what I've realized with high performance is that ability of sustaining good results or great results on a continuous basis over time. And that is achieved when you're not just running on go mode all the time, burning your fumes, but it's when you're also taking good care of yourself and being more intentional about your lifestyle overall to be able to hit those milestones and not burn out. So I think that's really where my perspective on high performance changed. I also trained later on, aside from just general coaching training, I trained as a health coach, as a nutrition coach. And those elements of biology really play such a huge role in our ability to perform over time. So that's an appreciation that I gained over the years.
You used the word there that I love, which is intentionality. I feel it's such an underrated concept, honestly. Like a lot of us, I mean, I think this doesn't apply only for the finance industry, but really any job or sector. Sometimes just like start working and you see how things go and just improvise along the way. But I think really the magic happens when you start being intentional about your time, about what you want to achieve, set up a plan, and really try to yeah to achieve those goals very clearly. I am obsessed right now with this sentence I heard in a podcast, which is that work expands to fill all available space, a little bit like gas.
Yeah.
And when you're intentional and you define some objectives and say, okay, today I want to achieve this week, this year, and you name it, like, and then you let work take over everything else, you become a lot more productive and you achieve a lot more than if you just start working and improvise along the way. I mean, it's a complete different mindset, right? Mindset shift, right?
Yes. Yeah, and I think also it depends on the type of work you do, but in a lot of these roles, there's a constant deal flow. Or if you're covering a lot of small and mid-cap companies like we used to in our team at GS, it's like you have earnings season all year round. You could stay at the office every day until 2 a.m. and still not do everything that needs to be done. So it's about also having that discipline to knowing when enough is enough, and now I need a self-preservation break, and not feeling guilty or feeling like you're slacking because you're doing that. Because when we're just in go mode and burning out, and we're sleep deprived, because sleep is often the first thing that goes, we don't even realize it. We think we're performing, but our cognitive ability is declining. And as a result, we're not performing at our best, which then means that we might need to work even longer hours. And it becomes a vicious circle. So it really requires having the discipline and the self-awareness to realize when it's time to slow down.
100%. I want to dig in so many of those things that you just alluded to. But before we talk about all of that, and also particularly the role of sleep, because I think honestly it's number one productivity hack out there. Again, also super underrated. Um, but maybe to close this first part of the conversation where we're talking about you and this career pivot that you're considering, what would you advise to someone who's trying to figure out how to take their next step when the path isn't linear, like it's your case has been?
Yeah. I think first of all, we need to normalize nonlinear paths. I think that when you look at very successful people, after in hindsight, you see how they became really successful. But when they were climbing that mountain, perhaps they were failing along the way. I mean, even Jeff Bezos had a stint of other businesses before he became really successful with Amazon. So I think first of all, we need to normalize the nonlinear. But then also, I think people need to think that if they're feeling lost and a bit unsure about their next step, it doesn't mean that they're broken or that they're failing. It means that they're still iterating. So think about it as training and reframe it. It's a bit like being a scientist. And obviously, I come from a science background. And as a scientist, you come up with a hypothesis, you go and test it in the lab, do an experiment, and then based on the results you get, you iterate. So I think it's important to think from that lens when you're looking to pivot. And then it's really about figuring out what energizes you, and then doubling down on your strengths while managing all the rest. That's, I think, where you're going to really find a career path that you can become really successful at, but can also be sustainable for yourself, and try to find what that sweet spot is for you. And to be honest, um, I think that detours are not necessarily something that should be frowned upon. It's something that actually can give you a leverage that other people don't have. Because when we do a detour, you gain other transferable skills that you can bring to your role later on. And you'll be able to connect dots between topics in ways that other people who had a more linear path cannot do. So I think it's really about perceiving that as a strength rather than a weakness. And honestly, when we think about the age of AI and we keep saying that the human skills and being flexible and emotional intelligence are actually going to be key for humans to become relevant, I think that's where these detours also can be really seen as a positive because, for example, if you take a pause for caregiving, what best training can you get on developing emotional intelligence than caregiving? I think hardly any. So I think it's really about leveraging those skills. Now, with all these things said, and now we're talking more in terms of how we need to reframe how we view pivots, I think you need to be mindful of geography. And there are markets where career pivots and nonlinear backgrounds are way more accepted and valued. So, for example, when I was working in London at Goldman Sachs, so I come from a biological engineering background, and I had colleagues who had been professional musicians, who had been TV presenters, who had majored in literature, and all these different skill sets were valued, and it was perceived as these people were bringing different perspectives. Now, for example, in continental Europe, and you'll tell me what your experience is in Switzerland, but I find that this type of nonlinear paths tend to not be perceived as positively. Continental Europe tends to be more conservative, and managers tend to prefer linear paths. So I think if someone is looking to pivot in a market like this, you need to become really intentional about telling your story and
Mm.
crafting your story in a way that highlights your transferable skills to potential hiring managers, not just on your CVs and cover letters, but also in conversations. And that's where networking becomes really, really important, because in a conversation, you can do what a CV often can't do, which is connect the dots for people on how you can actually help them in their own goals at their company. So in a nutshell, I would say that for anyone who's on a nonlinear path, is really about remembering that it's not a detour, it's training, really figuring out what your strengths are, staying open to iteration, and not be afraid to tell your story, but in a way that makes other people see the value in your journey. So
Mm.
that would be my advice.
Wow. I loved everything you said, honestly. I agree basically with everything you're saying. So I might be a bit biased here, but yeah, I'm a big fan also of nonlinear journeys. I like people that are a bit different, that think outside the box, that bring something different to the table. Um, yeah, and a lot of times I wonder, like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, as you were saying, or something else, but why is it that we as human beings, particularly on some sectors, are so obsessed with these linear journeys? Is it rooted in our brain? Like, is it genetic in the sense that we like certainty and we are not comfortable with, people doing things different than us? Or is it because more people wish they had nonlinear journeys and they're jealous of those that do it, and then add a bit of friction when they try to come back? What is it, in your opinion, that really makes nonlinear journeys a little bit uncommon and frowned upon?
Yeah. I think I would lean towards the first two pillars that you mentioned, the cultural aspects and the fear of uncertainty. I think cultural aspects definitely play a big role. And I'm speaking from my perspective in the Netherlands, but I've coached people in other geographies. France, I understand, is also quite conservative in terms of the paths that you can take. So I think it's a little bit of. Mm, you need to there are certain societies where you're more expected to conform to the norm, and I think, for example, the Anglo-Saxon world, whether that's in the UK or in the US, having a little bit of a different background is seen as positive and a sign of creativity and being nimble, and that's perceived really well. So I think
Mhm.
there's definitely a cultural element to that, and then the element of uncertainty. And here I'm also speaking from the perspective of hiring managers. I've spoken to clients, including, also more personally, my husband. Um, I think there is a fear from the person who's hiring that indeed the person won't be able to perform because they don't necessarily see the experience with the skill sets that are directly relevant to the role on their CV. But there's also an element of not losing face to other people in the organization. Because if you take a chance on somebody who's got a nonlinear background and it doesn't work out, it's much harder also to justify to the managers above you why you
Mm,
made that choice.
yeah.
And those managers above you might, simply be very reluctant to hire anybody who's got a different background, because then there's also the generational aspect of things. People who are in very, very senior positions, they are often also a little bit older, And then again, perhaps they're less used to this idea of people not having one career path for life.
Yeah, it's a really good answer. So it's a mix of things, probably. But yeah, I'm always puzzled by this, and I feel though I have to. Yeah, I think it's gonna change over the years as younger generations start getting more senior roles, and we get people in management positions that are used to seeing this kind of more different trajectories. I think it's going to get normalized and even encouraged in some organizations, and I really look forward for that, because I think people that come from different backgrounds and have lived different experiences and studied different things and seen different things definitely always have a different perspective and views to bring to the table, and I'm a big fan of that. So I want to pivot to another vertical of the conversation now, which is women in finance. It's always it's I'll be honest, it's a topic I'm very interested in. Like I think I need to be talking about this a lot more in my podcast. But as a man, I'm always like a little bit not uncomfortable, but I feel like I don't know if I have enough credibility to talk about this topic or not. So I'm very glad you're here to share your perspective as a woman, and yeah, and I really look forward to have this conversation in depth. So my first question is, obviously you've worked as an equity analyst in a very high pressure environment, which was Goldman Sachs, but you also coached women in a lot of these big IBs. What patterns have you noticed in how women in finance navigate power, navigate visibility, and their ambition to progress in an industry that has traditionally been very much male dominated? Hey there, quick favor to ask. If you enjoy the blunt dollar, the unfiltered takes, the stories, and the laughs, the easiest way to support the show is by tapping that subscribe button right now while you're listening. And here's my promise. If you do, I'll keep bringing you honest conversations, fresh perspectives, and the kind of finance talk that's engaging, insightful, and worth your time. Thanks so much for being here, and let's keep these great finance conversations going.
Sure. I would say that it's a spectrum, like in everything. There's different people, and also finance is not just IB. There's also commercial banking, which is perhaps slower paced. And I think, given the spectrum, I would say still there are 3 to 4 main patterns that I've spotted. There are some women who are happy to just play the long game, and they just keep on doing good work. They hope that they will be noticed. They're not really trying to take the spotlight. Sometimes they even shy away from taking more managerial roles. It happens, but not just among women. Men as well can do that. And this can be either because of their own personality and ambitions, or their level of agreeableness, which is that tendency to people please, or it can stem from perhaps some anchored fear that they will be perceived as arrogant and it will be frowned upon. So it can happen because of those 2 reasons as well. Then there's another type of pattern, which is women who are very ambitious, who perhaps are naturally more assertive and confident, but who at times will code switch because they will be a little bit afraid to be perceived as arrogant, etc. So they will take a step forward and then kind of take a step back. So that you see too. And then you have the opposite side of the spectrum. You have women who are very confident, very assertive, who really go for the top positions. And I think there it's I mean, it depends. It sometimes women in these environments can adopt an almost hyper masculine approach in their leadership style, um, and that's, I think, when it starts being frowned upon. But there are women who lead from a very assertive, almost aggressive standpoint, which is not always conducive to having very thriving teams, I must say. So I think what you see less of is the sweet spot of having women who are very assertive and very confident, but who don't seem to be trying to outmen the men, who are very anchored in who they are, their own strengths, who lead with empathy, and who do a great job with all bringing their whole self to the position, basically.
Okay, I never thought about all those different profiles. That's really, really insightful. Thanks for that. And have you seen, or do you believe there's like cultural norms that hold women back in the finance industry at all?
Yeah, I do think so. I think from an institutional perspective, a lot has been done already in the Western developed world, and obviously this varies from geography to geography. And I'm speaking from the perspective of a white heterosexual woman in a Western developed country. So, with that caveat in mind, I think from an institutional perspective, a lot has already been done in terms of DEI, in terms of thinking about promoting more women to leadership positions, and that's all very positive. I think where there's still a lot holding women back are the cultural norms, and specifically when it comes to women being expected to be the primary caregiver, especially when children come along, or in the case of aging parents. And that's when I think a lot of very bright, talented women take a step back from their careers, and that ultimately is going to be detrimental in the longer run for the level of income that they can command and how far they can progress. Now, I would like to just say that it's not only women. It's less common, but I've seen men being the ones who take a step back and are more hands on at home, but it still is overwhelmingly more common in heterosexual couples to have the woman do that. Now, I can't pretend to speak for queer couples, but I'm sure that some kind of trade off may also happen in those settings. Because the truth is, when you have a career in finance, and especially feels more like IB or private equity that are so fast paced and so demanding as careers, it helps a lot to have somebody at home who holds the fort.
Yeah.
And again, more often than not, that role is played by the woman rather than the man.
Yeah, I mean, you touch upon an interesting concept there, which is that this invisible labor dynamic. So you've raised kids, you built a business, and you're still in the game. And but yeah, I feel many women like silently carry that load, that invisible labor dynamic, which is, as you say, like it's very important, but professionally speaking, it's maybe less seen. Let's put it that way. Just because you get out of the regular linear workforce, and you take care of your family, and it's almost like if you disappeared for some time, which is, I believe, is completely unfair. Um, uh, what could be done to change the way this dynamic is taking place?
Sure. I I think there's really two pillars to it, so to speak. I think one thing that is already being done, in my humble opinion, not enough though, is returnship programs. I think returnship programs where companies create some sort of structured internship for enabling career returners to go back to those sorts of careers are super valuable. And I'm very pleased to see big weight companies in the industry like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, BlackRock, amongst others, to roll out, they're started to roll out this kind of programs in some of their offices, unfortunately, not all of them. So I think that's very positive. And
Is
then
it a
there
big
are,
thing? Sorry, just one question related to that. These
yeah, sure.
returnship programs, like, is it something that you feel it's growing at the moment, or is it like
Yeah.
still something very niche?
Well, it's definitely grown over the years, and I think with all the DEI initiatives, it has grown. But it is still quite niche. And I actually, one of my former clients, her name is Angela Fazaro. She founded an organization called Every Mother Knows. If anyone wants to check it out, it's you can find more about it at everymotherknows.org, and it's an organization that helps bridge that gap between companies and career returners, and helps companies create also these programs. It helps candidates get in touch with these companies. So there are organizations, usually not for profit organizations, who help with that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I still find that it's quite niche. Also, the reception of these programs depends on geography. Again, in places where nonlinear paths are more accepted and valued, there's more acceptance for this kind of programs. But in continental Europe, there can be still a bit of a push from these organizations to try and get their message across. But whenever they managed to create these returnship programs also in continental Europe, the feedback from the corporates was extremely positive. So I think it's also more about rolling more of these initiatives and showing results and positive testimonials that will eventually give more confidence to managers that it's not taking a big risk to get somebody who's highly qualified, extremely driven, very brilliant, with emotional intelligence that many younger people don't have, with extreme work ethic that sometimes younger generations, I understand, can lack a little bit, and this can be controversial, but there's so many articles these days talking about that. So I think it's about getting that message across. And that's from the returnship side of things. And the other one is changing societal norms, which obviously does not happen overnight. But I think moving more to a society that is more egalitarian, where caregiving, namely for children, is divided more equally between mother and father, those things in the long run are what are going to really move the needle, making sure that childcare is affordable and available and high quality, that maternity and paternity leaves are not minuscule. All those things, I think over time will improve the situation. But again, perhaps we need to see also a bit of a generational churn for the mindset to change overall as well.
And one depends obviously on corporates, the other one more on governments.
Yeah.
But talking about the returnships programs, I'm a bit like fascinated by this because for me it's such a no-brainer. Like I feel every corporate should be doing this exactly for the reasons you were alluding to. I mean, someone that comes back to the industry after taking a long break knows exactly what he or she wants, right? Like it doesn't happen by accident. You've been through a lot of stuff, and if you decide to come back, it's really because you are convinced that it's what you want to do. So you're going to be highly motivated. You have experience. You're probably also going to be super thankful for the opportunity of being able to come back towards that employer, to trust you again, because I understand that after some time out, coming back is not easy, and there's obviously a little bit of thankfulness for the trust, I'm sure. I mean, I only see positives. I think everyone should be doing this, honestly. So I hope we're going to see more and more of these returnship programs over the coming years, especially for women, of course, because as you were saying, they've been the primary caregiver over the years. But yeah, I'll keep an eye also on your friend's website. I think it's really really cool. So I have another question. So you've been coaching, I guess, a lot of women also, and told them to stay authentic. But I was wondering, how do you coach them, or what do you tell them when they could possibly sometimes be penalized for traits that would actually be rewarded in male counterparts, which I think it doesn't make any sense.
I think it's an interesting question, and it's definitely a question that comes up very often. However, I don't necessarily subscribe that women are inherently penalized for those traits, like being confident, assertive, proactive. Um, what I have observed is that those types of traits bring about criticism, not because of the traits themselves, but how they are expressed.
Mhm.
And I'm going to go back to something that I alluded to earlier. Um, what I've seen is that when you see women who almost seem like they're in a hyper masculine mode to try to outpace and out tough the men, that's when traits like confidence and assertiveness get criticized. And I think it has less to do with the fact that it's a woman expressing assertiveness and more to do with the fact that it's coming from a persona. It's a performance. It's not something authentic. And what happens when we are acting, when we are just performing, is our attention is in ourselves. It's not on the other person. It's not in reading the room. So emotional intelligence goes down.
Yeah.
And that's when that sort of trait can come across as abrasive. So I don't inherently subscribe to the idea that, oh, yeah, a woman who's confident and assertive is going to be criticized. So in terms of coaching women through this, my advice is to get really clear on who you are in your strengths, stay grounded in your own body, And then from that place, you can express your views with clarity and assertiveness and with confidence. And when you're able to do that, but that's also true for men for that matter, when you're able to really be in your body, confident in yourself, being authentic, when you express yourself confidently, it's not going to be criticized. It's going to be respected and you're going to be listened to. So I
Mhm,
think it has more to do with authenticity and rather than trying to shy away from some traits because of cultural norms.
mhm. Okay, that's a good one. And I have a question related to less so with maybe authenticity, but more about leadership, because we've seen more women entering the finance industry in this past few years, which is great. But I believe there's still very few women at the top in the top management positions. Definitely less women than men at the moment. What's getting in the way of that final leap to leadership for women?
It's an interesting one. And perhaps I would disagree with you on that, but it can literally be a geography thing as well. At least from where I'm sitting, I'm seeing many women being promoted to really high ranked positions. Perhaps there are certain areas of finance that tend to promote women really high compared to others. Perhaps things more like middle office roles tend to be more conducive to that in positions like risk or legal, for example. We're seeing more and more women. But I think even more in commercial front office roles, we're seeing more and more women getting to those levels. Many people who I work with, by now they're CFOs, they are CIOs. So I actually see more and more women getting there. And I think when you point out the fact that there's still less women in these positions than men, I think it is a factor of the cultural norms. Because also to be able to get to those positions, you need to have a certain number of years in the industry. You need to have the experience, the credibility, etc. And if many women took a hiatus in their career, they may simply not be there at the same age as men are, simply because they missed that portion of their career in corporate. So it has more to do again with these cultural norms that need to be changed for more women to really stay fully engaged in their careers over time, and that compounds. So I would say it has more to do with that.
Yeah, I might be biased, but my feeling, I mean, if I look at all the CEOs and CIOs of the big investment banks and yeah, and the big banks like that I have in mind, it's pretty much only men. I don't have the stats though, so I
Yeah,
might be wrong here, but I
yeah,
still have the feeling that at least in certain roles, it's pretty much skewed towards male, and I hope over the upcoming years that's
yeah.
going to change. Um,
Yeah, I think, I mean, definitely we've made a lot of progress, at least in, again, Western developed world. And I think that's very positive. Um, what makes me a little bit uncomfortable, and that's where I think thinking about these issues about women in finance can become quite tricky and controversial, is I think to a certain extent it's been, the progress that has been achieved through quotas. And what I would like to see is the industry really being meritocratic and
yeah.
egalitarian, which obviously means that society as a whole needs to have those support structures in place when it comes to childcare and parental leave and things like that to enable women to stay fully engaged over time and get to those positions based on meritocracy. So, yes, I think I don't know the stats exactly. For sure, there are still more men in those positions than there are women, but I would like to see more women getting to those roles based on meritocracy rather than just quotas for the sake of optics.
Yeah, 100%. In quotas, I feel it's a little bit of a controversial one. It's a double-edged sword. On one side, I think all in all, it's better to have them than not have them, I guess, because it's it's pushing, more women to the forefront and so on, and allow at least on in terms of percentages, let's put it that way, for the playing ground to get leveled up faster. So that's great. But at the same time, yes, sometimes quotas criticized, right? Because people are like, oh yeah, she only got promoted because they had to promote a woman to that position or
Yeah.
something like that, which defeats the purpose.
Yeah.
And 100%, I mean, the ideal world would be one where it's just based on meritocracy. It doesn't really matter if you're male, female, your color, your age, nothing. I mean, just who you are and what you deliver, basically, and what you bring to the table. I hope we get there at some point. But yeah, quotas. I understand it's a touchy one.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, can I just say on that
yeah,
personally, and that's my view, I am very much pro meritocracy. And for me, discrimination is discrimination, whether it's negative discrimination or positive discrimination. So I'm not a huge fan of quotas. And again, I think what we would need more instead of having quotas is the open-mindedness from corporates to engage with returnship programs, to perhaps bring women who are still of this generation where perhaps we didn't have great maternity leaves and we put our careers in the back burner, enabling us to return and value our contributions, rather than just deciding, okay, we need to hire these many women to show to the board that we have
yeah,
50% of women in leadership positions. But that's my view.
yeah. No, and it's an excellent point. Honestly, it's so tricky. Um, yeah, because what about, I mean, bouncing on that example, if those many women that were hired are actually pretty good too, I mean, that's great, like, so it's always like the devil is in the details. It depends on each situation. But again, like, yeah, I feel we're making progress. We're not there yet, but at least we're going in the right direction. We just need to accelerate things a little bit more, probably, and in a few years, hopefully, we will have closed that invisible gap in some way, or that visible gap, actually.
And
um
I actually do wonder if AI is going to contribute a little bit to that, because with the emergence of AI, people are going to be forced to reskill and pivot. So going back
uh-huh.
to the idea of linear versus nonlinear paths, if you normalize nonlinear paths, then hopefully there is also more openness to hiring people who are career returners.
Yeah,
So hopefully it will move in the right direction.
that's cool. Actually, it won't be male versus woman. It would be
Oh, versus the
robots
machine.
versus humans, and we'll be
Yes,
like, oh my god, that's where the real issue is now. We're gonna
yeah,
have to put quotas for humans. That's the thing. In a
exactly.
few years, like, oh my god, they're just hiring robots.
Exactly.
We need to ensure like 5% of the workforce is human.
Absolutely,
Can you
absolutely.
imagine? We could do a TV show about that. Let's pitch Netflix. I think we're into something there.
Yeah,
Um,
perhaps.
so you've coached a lot of women. You've seen a lot of successful women up very, very close during your coaching sessions. What's something most people don't realize about the mindset that these very, very successful women in finance have? Hey there, quick ad break. Do you work in the finance industry and have a genuinely interesting story to share? I'm always on the hunt for great guests who bring raw, unfiltered insights to the table. Or maybe you know someone with a story worth telling? Please put us in touch. You can reach out to me directly via LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you. And now, back to the show.
That is a very good question. I think one thing that tends to be more prevalent among women than men is imposter syndrome.
Mm,
And this idea that, oh, they're going to find out that actually I'm not that good, or what if I don't really measure up and I need to keep face, and on top of it, I'm a woman and I might be criticized, etc. So I think there's way more fear of not measuring up than I see among men.
mhm,
Um, and perhaps it would be good to have that in mind whenever you work with women, um, that perhaps a certain level of reassurance and celebrating their achievements is needed. Again, I think a lot has been done already, especially in large corporates with women's networks and events. I think that is become more mainstream. But I think there is a distinction that I would say between men and women. Of course, men can also feel that they have a bit of imposter syndrome, but it's more prevalent among women.
mhm. So maybe to wrap up this part of the conversation about women, which by the way took a lot more than I thought, but it's very fascinating. So we might have to do other episodes for the rest of the all the things that I was planning to talk about with you. But from your perspective, then, what does meaningful progress for women in finance look like? Is it more of those returnship programs that you were alluding to, or something else?
I think it's actually something that we already touched upon, which is that meaningful progress would be not having to talk about women in finance, but people in finance, and reaching a point where the system is meritocratic and egalitarian, and your gender becomes not the most interesting thing about your career anymore. Um, so I would say that would be the biggest progress, but obviously it entails societal norms changing. So it's not going to be an
Mhm.
overnight thing.
Okay. Well, thank you for all those perspectives on finance and women. I suggest now we pivot to another part of the conversation, which I had penciled in, which is biases in decision making. So you have a cool blog series, I find, which mixes finance with coaching, even with a little bit of dating, and I think it's pretty brilliant. So what inspired you to connect the dots between
Yeah.
love and money?
Sure. So actually, that connection happened quite organically. So when I first launched my coaching practice, I was focusing on high performers and I was helping them with performance, with career pivots, sometimes with managing stress, and ultimately not burning out. And then I noticed that there was, I started shifting over the years towards more the executive health coaching side of things because I realized that your health and wellness really underpins your ability to perform. But then something very interesting started happening, which is people would often hire me to talk about their career and stress management, etc. And then they won't end up talking about their dating life, their marriage, their unmet needs. And we ended up doing quite a bit of more like relationship coaching in a way. And it's actually not that surprising if you think about the Harvard study of adult development, which has been running for decades on. It shows that the greatest predictor of your happiness and longevity is actually the quality of your relationships. So I started digging more into that. And then a few months ago, actually, I was having a very fascinating conversation with very senior manager in the investment management industry. And he was telling me about the challenges of managing very skilled portfolio managers who are still falling prey to behavioral biases. So I started doing some digging into behavioral finance and went down that rabbit hole. And the more I read, the more I realized that there were so many parallels between how we behave in investing and how we behave in our romantic relationships. And that's where the blog series came from, because at the end of the day, we are humans. And oftentimes, how we do one thing is how we do everything. So that's how I connected the dots between money and dating, I guess.
And one that I liked is that in both relationships and investing, a lot of times we hold on to bad decisions for too long. Either we hold a stock for too long, or we're stuck in a toxic relationship for too long. What makes it so hard to walk away, whether from a bad investment or a relationship?
Yeah, I think there are two elements to it. One is the sunk cost fallacy. We have a very strong aversion to loss. So we don't really want to admit that, it was a failure, it's time to leave. And we keep on investing more, whether it's in the stock or whether it's in a relationship, because we still expect it to turn around and we hope for that. But the other aspect to it is literally brain chemistry. Because especially when you have very volatile stocks or very volatile relationships, like situationships, which for those who are not looking at the dating world, people are calling situationships these situations people get into where there's intimacy, but they don't label what sort of relationship they have, and they break up, they get back together. So it's very complicated. And when you have these peaks and troughs, whether it's in investing or whether in your personal relationships, dopamine starts playing a big role. And dopamine is that hormone in your brain that is about wanting and the reward system. So you get a hit of dopamine when things are going well, and then when things go wrong, dopamine crashes, and then you're expecting another dose of dopamine to come up. So you're constantly in that expectation mode, and that's exactly what happens with gambling.
Yeah.
When you have like a variable reward system that you don't know when the next positive hit is going to come, it keeps you addicted in the game. And that's why it's so hard to walk away, even for very smart, data driven people, because at the end of the day, we're humans.
Mhm.
And whether we're talking about the biases or we're talking about the brain chemistry, if we fall prey to that, doesn't mean that we're dumb. Actually, these things exist because of evolution. Even the biases that we display, emotional biases, cognitive biases, they developed because over years of evolution, thousands of years of evolution, it paid off to have mental shortcuts to make decisions. Imagine that you were a Neanderthal and you kind of notice some rustling in the bushes. It's better for you to assume that it's a threat and to react immediately rather than pause and analyze whether that might be a predator. So we created these heuristics, these rules of thumb to make decisions on the fly. But yes, in a very complex, dynamic environment that is quite abstract, like finance or even relationships, falling prey to these biases or just getting, letting our brain chemistry rule the show might not be the best thing to do.
Yeah, 100%. And another thing that stood out from your series was this thing called blind spot bias, which is the idea that we can see other people's flaws, but we are a little bit less aware of our own. So how do you confront people? How do you help people confront their own blind spots without triggering all sorts of negative reactions?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky one. And I think it actually people need to be coachable, and not everybody is, for that matter. People need to have a certain degree of growth mindset, which contrasts with fixed mindset. The fixed mindset is this idea that I am the way I am and I'm not going to change and evolve. The growth mindset is this openness to growing and developing. So I think there needs to be someone who's got that mindset. And then sometimes getting a third party involved, like a coach, can be helpful. Somebody who's supposed to be neutral, who's not your boss, that you will feel threatened if they're pointing out your blind spots. And actually, I recently was introduced to a company called Essentia Analytics. They do exactly that. So what they do is they work with PMs and they help track their behavior and correlate that with their performance. If they're on a winning streak versus a losing streak, how their emotions were at that time. And then based on those correlations, they see, okay, how do these types of emotions or these types of streaks in your performance affect your behaviors? Are you trading more often? Are you making bigger trades? And they point that out to people. And just the fact of giving them an analysis of, okay, these are the patterns that we've identified for you, reportedly, it already helps them a lot in checking in with themselves. And again, because it's an external party, it feels less confrontational to get that sort of feedback.
Yeah, I think a lot of times just being aware of your bias is already half of the solution, probably not for all of the biases, but in a lot of cases. It's just, yeah, because we so often tend to, yeah, to be biased without even noticing that. Yeah, if someone comes out and makes us realize what we're doing, it's already a big step forward. And you also think you also explain in your series that one of the most underrated biases is the curse of knowledge. So can you maybe tell us a bit more about it, what it is, and also how does that bias affect the way we communicate with teams and with clients and so on?
Sure. So the curse of knowledge is really when you think that other people know what you do, what you know, and you just assume that everybody knows what you're talking about and has the same insights that you have. So it affects how you communicate with people in as much as you may be talking to people, but not really connecting with people on the level that they are and the type of knowledge and expertise that they have. So I think there was actually one of your podcasts guests who touched on that at some point. Somebody who worked, I think, for the California state, and he was talking about how the fact that when you're trying to explain to pensioners like what investment decisions you're making, you need to use quite simple language, no
Mhm.
jargon, because it doesn't mean that these
Yeah.
people are simpletons. It means that their expertise lies somewhere else. So I think when you have that curse of knowledge is you need to think about who your audience is
Yeah.
and adapt the level of content and your language to who your audience actually is, which in a way is a bit what marketers do. When you're a marketer, you really try to first really understand who your audience is. Sometimes even create an ideal client avatar, and then you craft your message for that particular avatar. And I think oftentimes that gets a little bit lost in the corporate world,
Mhm.
that people don't necessarily get very attuned to who they're talking to.
Yeah. So you were talking about the episode with Wiley Tollett, the CIO of Franklin
Yes.
Templeton Investment Solutions, when he was working for CalPERS, the pension fund of the state of California. So
Yes.
yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, wow. I mean, I love this topic. Honestly, I'm a big fan of behavioral finance, and maybe coming back to this awareness of your biases concept. Once someone knows their bias, how can they actually change their behavior? Is being aware enough, or do you think there's like some steps that we can follow in order to correct it faster or more efficiently?
Well, obviously, the first step is awareness. So that's the starting point, is to analyze your patterns. And keeping a journal, as boring as that may be, helps a lot in that. Whether you do it by yourself or with a coach, it's up to you. But figure out exactly what your patterns are. Then what
Yeah.
you can do is make yourself a little cheat sheet where you literally keep that next to your desk. And okay, when I'm feeling this emotion or when this sort of pattern is happening in my performance, I tend to do this behavior. And next
Mhm.
time you're feeling the same thing, you just glance at your list and you think to yourself, you pause. Okay, I was about to go and do this trade, for example. Am I doing that because it's the rational thing to do? Or am I doing that because it's my bias? And just pause. And that's where the gold is in the pause. And then obviously support and accountability help a lot. So, for example, when I was working at Goldman Sachs, any investment recommendation we had to run it through the investment research committee. It was called the IRC, which is basically you would go there and pitch your recommendation to the directors of research,
Mhm.
and they would drill you. And it wasn't personal. Sometimes it wasn't pleasant, but it was really to stress test your thinking. So if you can have those sorts of checkpoints in your teams, whether it's with the very senior managers or literally with your peers, just to challenge your thinking, that's very helpful. So it's also about finding accountability among the people you work with
Yeah,
or your
which
family.
takes and it takes effort, right? Like it's not easy to do this exercise, to put yourself out there and really try to challenge yourself, but definitely an exercise worth doing. And I also find what you're saying about journaling so interesting. I feel journaling is coming back in fashion like big time. No matter where you look at, there's so many, different use cases of it. Like I play golf, for example, and right now I just subscribed to a mental game program, and basically it's all about journaling. I haven't started yet, but they send me a journal, and apparently it helps too. There's also this morning reflections thing, which is huge, where people are journaling in every morning what they want to accomplish during the day. What is it about journaling that makes it so effective, in your opinion?
I think, and I'm a big fan of writing, I think when you're writing, you are forced to organize your ideas and your thoughts
Mm.
in a way that if you just have fleeting ideas in your head doesn't get so anchored. So I think that's where the magic is. Now there's research that shows that actually if you handwrite, it's
Yeah.
way more powerful than typing. So perhaps you might want to experiment with that. But I do realize that it can be quite time consuming. And if you're on the go, you might not want to sit down every morning for 10 minutes journaling on your thoughts, etc. So sometimes, especially when you're on the go and you're just noticing these patterns, even just literally picking up your phone and
Yeah.
jotting down some notes just to keep track is already very helpful, whether you do
Yeah.
it through handwriting or not.
Yeah, and I feel the act of handwriting instead of talking or thinking about it, it's a lot more efficient, honestly, because a lot of times we're lazy about it, but yet the act of sitting down and putting it on paper makes it stay more ingrained in your brain. Elsa, we've been talking for around an hour. It's been amazing. I'll be honest, we haven't even gone through 50% of the questions I had prepared. We had another vertical here, which was wellness and stress management. We had another one, which was coaching and emotional intelligence. So I'm going to ask you live on the episode if you would be open at some point in a couple of months to come back and maybe cover those with us. Because I feel, I mean, we still have many, many things to talk about here.
Sure, absolutely. I'm very passionate about wellness. I come from a background in biological engineering, and I was always very interested in biology and how that impacts us and our performance. So, very keen to talk about that. I'll probably take another hour and a half talking about wellness.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to. That's why I don't want to rush it. I don't want to ask you like just two questions and then move on because I feel there's a lot we can talk about there. So we'll put the conversation on pause. I'll ask you a couple of wrap up questions here, and then we'll do a new episode if you have time, of course, in a couple of months. But yeah, maybe to wrap up this first part then of the pod. I always like to ask my guests if you look back, what's one piece of advice that you wish someone had whispered in your ear at the start of your finance career?
Hmm. I think it would be stay the course. And in a way, it echoes that book by Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In. I think I was overly optimistic that I could um, step away a little bit from the front lines, like you framed it at the beginning, and then go back. And I didn't appreciate the resistance that I might face in the industry after a number of years. And I know for a fact that this happens to many women. I've heard of regretful tones from more than a handful. So I think that would be that is to just stay calm and carry on and somehow try to make it work and juggle it all.
Mhm.
Um, but stay the course and don't step back.
That's a good one. And trust the process, trust the journey.
Yeah,
Um,
trust the journey. And I guess also probably ask for help more. Because especially in finance, many of us are H-type personalities and we think we can do it all. And perhaps we don't like asking for help more. But especially when it comes to, again, managing a full life with family and a career,
Mhm.
I think you are bound to ask for help. Otherwise, something's got to give. And either you get that help from a partner, parents, paid help if you can afford it. It's still important to think that you can't do it all the time and have it all at the same time.
Yeah, that's a good one. And talking about help, I guess a lot of people listening to this might be quietly questioning where they're going, the stage of their career they're at, why they're doing it, how they're doing it. So, what would you say to someone who's silently feeling stuck or even burning out right now?
Yeah, I think that's where reflection is really valuable. And it doesn't mean that you need to step away and take a sabbatical and go to business school like I did. But it means that perhaps you need to slow down to again know when it's time to take a break.
Mhm.
Prioritize your sleep because I think a lot of times when we are feeling really frazzled and overwhelmed and feeling lost and burned out, to be honest, sleep is the basis. And actually, if you want to do an episode at another point, I can walk you through a framework that I use, which I call Renew. And the R in Renew stands for rest. So I would say the first thing is that person needs to prioritize recovery.
Mhm.
And then probably the fog will clear. They will start thinking more clearly. And then I would encourage them to try to slow down, but not step out, which is where I think I made a mistake.
Wow. Okay, I mean, now you're building up. I already want to record that episode.
It's a
That's gonna be
teaser.
amazing. Teaser for part two, guys. So Elsa, this has been absolutely amazing. I love this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I think you are a brilliant woman. I'm very, very excited for what's ahead for you. I have no doubt that you're gonna achieve all your objectives this year, and in no time you're gonna be in the job of your dreams within the finance industry. Count on me to help you in any way or form to get there. And thank you once again for coming to the show. I hope our listeners found it as useful as I did. I took plenty of notes, and I'm excited to see you soon for the next one.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Ignacio. I really appreciate it. And perhaps I would just add one thing. I know that a lot of people in your audience are actually men. And I would just like to point the following out. Like, one of the reasons I'm so motivated to going back is to set an example for my daughters. There's lots of research that shows that girls who are raised by stay-at-home moms tend to not do as well as women who are raised by working mothers. So if you're a partner and you have a wife who perhaps wants to get back to her ambitious goals, if you could be supportive of that, that would be amazing, because it's not just for the sake of your partner, but also for the sake of your kids if you have daughters.
Wow, that's a good one. So now I have to ask you, I mean, I didn't understand that right. So there's research that shows
Yes.
that kids that stay with their parents or at home tend to perform less well when they enter the
It's
professional labor
specific to
force?
girls,
Okay.
that girls who were raised by stay-at-home mothers,
Yeah,
myself included, tend to not reach those high leadership positions as often as women who are raised by working mothers. And it does make sense because we do tend to mimic a little bit what we see in our families of origin.
that's
So
interesting.
I find this particularly relevant also as a discussion in terms of women in finance is also being role models for the generations to come.
Wow. Oh my God, I would have never thought about that. Because, yeah, maybe, yeah, there's that part of mimicking, but at the other side, I would assume maybe they have maybe more self-esteem because being surrounded by your parents makes you probably feel better about yourself and maybe higher emotional intelligence and so on. So I'd be curious
Oh,
to,
you're getting me started on something else. We're going to go for another half an hour, because very often, actually, high achievers, they're not necessarily the people with the highest self-esteem. You hear many very, very successful people who, especially these days where people become a bit more vulnerable online, they do talk about their insecurities, because
yeah,
oftentimes we push ourselves to be really high achievers because we don't feel good enough.
yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah. So
Okay,
there's
so
that element as well.
we'll start the next episode talking about that, and then we will move on to the next part of the conversation. Stay tuned, because there's going to be a lot coming about wellness, stress management, linking biology in there, and then of course a little bit more on emotional intelligence from a coaching perspective. Elsa, it's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you. You too.
The Blunt Dollar is written, produced, hosted, and edited by me, Ignacio Ramirez. Everything you hear, concept, script, sound design, and production, comes straight from my desk, and occasionally my kitchen table. Thank you so much for listening, and join me in the next episode of The Blunt Dollar for more raw, honest finance conversations.